complicated life is and how beautiful it is, how diverse it is, and how it looks designed. And so I could well imagine people saying, I give up. However, to say it must have been created, I mean, that's just illogical, because it's no more easy to explain the origin of a creator than it is to explain the origin of the complexity of life itself. It's a total and complete non-explanation. So before Darwin came along, it would have been perfectly respectable to say, I give up. It's incredibly complicated. There must be an explanation, but I can't think of it. And then Darwin came along and did think of it. But to say, therefore, it must have been designed is a total and complete cop-out. It doesn't explain anything.
It's actually contradictory. If you say, I give up, it must have been designed, then you haven't given up.
Yeah.
You've offered an explanation.
Exactly.
And you don't even care if it's true.
Exactly.
The God of the God that is depicted in the Old Testament he goes, I'm picking the Jews. Yes. I'm choosing you.
To the extent that your
enemies become my enemies,
to the extent that your male and female slaves may come from the nations around you. From them you may buy and sell slaves. You may also purchase some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born in your town. You can bequeath them to your children as inheritable property. This is human beings, by the way. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So not only do we have, the description of slavery in the Old Testament, we have an explicit condoning instructions on how to do it and doing it based on race.
Well, I wouldn't say based on race, because
how else do you interpret?
First of all, racism is an invention of the modern
tribe.
world.
Call it tribe if you like.
Ethnicity. These are clans.
These are
militaristic
Israelite
clans.
slaves this way, and you treat non-Israelite slaves this way. By the way that the Israelite slaves are treated, we're told in Exodus 21, if you have a male slave, they're to go free after 7 years. But if you give them a wife and they have children while they're your property, then they don't go free after 7 years, only the man does. And Exodus 21 says, but if the man decides that he loves his wife and his children and his master and wants to stay, then he can say to his master he wants to stay, at which point he's taken outside, his ear is pierced like cattle, and he becomes a slave for life. Now, by the way, female slaves aren't let go after 7 years at all in the first place. Now, I understand what you're saying when you say, okay, maybe God couldn't have abolished slavery for some reason, but at least, for example, when the male slave goes free, let his wife and children go with him.
Yeah.
Why not this simple moral improvement? There is no conceivable reason.
The claims in the book are not at all hard to parse. In fact, so many of them can only be honestly interpreted one way. So to take, again, an example that will be not inflammatory to you, but makes the point, it just says that the remedy for theft in the Quran is to cut the hands off a thief. I mean, that is the unambiguous injunction. It's not an allegory. Mm-hmm. It's not. You have to indulge some kind of tortured interpretive scheme to avoid the shocking fact that the creator of the universe thinks you should live this way for all time. And people like ISIS. This is my claim. It's just most of what is in these books, and this is what worries me about those books because they can't be edited. Most of what's in the books is clearly not the best that humanity is capable of in the ethical domain, or in this.
So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene, quoting the prophets. Now you'll notice if you read an online Bible that where the Old Testament prophets are quoted, there's a little footnote telling you what the prophecy is. In this case, you won't find one, because the prophecy simply doesn't exist. It's not there. There's no such thing. So there are two options here. Either Matthew made up this prophecy, or got it wrong, in which case the New Testament is mistaken, or the prophecy does exist, but for some reason fell out of our scriptural tradition and now no longer exists, which makes the accuracy and at least the completeness of the Old Testament suspect. So again, I'd like to ask directly which it is.
What you're saying is that the reason to fear religious dogma is really on the dogma side and not the religion side, which at least leaves open the possibility that something could exist over on the religion side that doesn't have that characteristic. right? That often they travel in tandem, but that the thing to fear is not the religious belief, it is the dogmatic nature of the way it is conveyed.
Oh, yeah.
Is that fair?
The other way to say that is the only thing that's wrong with religion is the dogmatism. If you get rid of the I've got no problem with the buildings and the music and the paintings and.
They were instructed by God.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
So God has commanded them to do something which you now consider to be immoral, whether or not you consider it to be immoral because of the later developments of Christian ethics. God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition that the slaughter of women and children, and by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them, is wrong.
I don't view it that way. This is how I view it. Let's put it this way. Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world, which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
And God says, keep going.
No,
Keep it up. You're doing such a good job.
God does not say keep going. But what God does is and again, this is called, trying to get the point of what is happening. There's slavery in this world, in the ancient world, and it is true. The Bible doesn't come in and go, we denounce slavery, we denounce the killing of women and children. It doesn't do that.
The opposite.
It actually immerses itself into an existing, admittedly barbaric culture. And what's actually going on there with the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and so on, if you just read the Old Testament, it tells you. It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
That's fine.
Hold on.
That justifies the murder of children and women.
I didn't say it does.
That's what you're implying.
I'm saying
Otherwise
that the way it
about
happens historically is God takes a side. The single monotheistic God, who, by the way, in the Old Testament does not act like a monotheistic God. He acts like a tribal God. Right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
And so Israel's enemies... Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
So Sam, you said the problem here is that the dogma can't be updated, right? That slavery is with us permanently because it's written into the dogma. But clearly most of the traditions in which it's written into the holy book don't practice slavery, and the people who adhere to these belief systems wouldn't defend slavery. So clearly there is the capacity for an update mechanism.
Well, no, but not really. I mean, they've been forced, they've had it beaten out of them, right? I mean, we fought a civil war in the U.S. to get rid of slavery.
But it was Christians who abolished slavery in England, though.
What was that?
It was Christians who were at the forefront of the movement to abolish slavery in England.
There are Christians on either side of everything. I mean, there's no one else to do the job.
Right, but that's the update mechanism.
Wait a second. But it was specifically Christians who were using their Christian belief as a justification for eradicating slavery.
The problem was they were actually on the losing side of a theological argument. And it would be much better, I think you would agree, if one of the 10 commandments had been, don't keep slaves. I mean, there's certainly one we could swap out for that one. And so that way, it would have been much easier for Christians to have fought against slavery. And it's much harder for Muslims, frankly, to fight against it now. The problem is that there's a point I made, I think, in my first book, is that the doors leading out of this kind of fundamentalism don't open from the inside. They get bashed open from the outside. And it's humanism and it's secularism and it's scientific rationality that has exerted such pressure, such winnowing pressure on Christianity, now for multiple centuries, that's why we're not encountering the Christians of the 14th century on a daily basis. We are essentially encountering Muslims of the 14th century.
It's very, very straightforwardly then.
Okay.
Luke says that after the birth of Jesus, the family fled to Egypt. Matthew says that they went to the Jerusalem temple. Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Who the heck cares? I mean, look.
Well, I do, and so
you
probably
do.
the
But
people who are listening to a debate about whether the Bible is true.
Let me say why what you care about is not only trivial, but indicates a kind of unwillingness to try to get what the text is trying to communicate.
I'll tell you why I don't think it's trivial. Because I think that
trivial?
the reason why Luke may have invented the flight to Egypt, he tells us. Luke says, when he records the flight to Egypt, and then they return from Egypt, he says, this is so that we can fulfill the prophecy from Hosea chapter 11, out of Egypt I shall call my son. Now, in Hosea, God is talking here about the nation of Israel, at least in this case, unlike the Matthew prophecy, the prophecy actually exists and we can interrogate it. It seems to me like what Luke is doing here is attempting to display Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. And in fact, he tells us that that's what he's doing. Therefore, if it is the case that Jesus didn't go to Egypt and didn't come out of Egypt on his return, then this would undermine Luke's attempts to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. That's why I think it is relevant.
Well, look.
And not trivial.
Right, but I think that the...
Would you agree with that? I mean, do you think it's a completely trivial point? If it's so trivial,
no, I think that the point,
why
as
is it included in the first place?
point as you stated it before, is trivial. The point you're now raising is not trivial, but the point you're now raising...
The kind of God that the fundamentalists believe in, the God who's an invisible person who hates homosexuals, obviously that's not the deepest version of these religious, this essentially what is a narrative technology for orienting human life in the cosmos. So maybe I'll leave it there, but that's, I think, what Jordan thinks.
All right, Jordan, before you steel man Sam's point, how did you feel about his encapsulation of yours?
Well, I'm convinced, man.
So secular humanism can easily be viewed as a religion. The U.S. Supreme Court has defined it in the sense of pursuit for ultimate answers to ultimate questions or things like that. But if you want to say that my God is truth or goodness or whatever thing, I'm fine with that in a poetic, even metaphorical sense. The problem is when you talk about if what you believe in fulfills all the roles of a deity, I think you're sidelining what a lot of the roles of a deity have played throughout the entirety of human history. Because they're advocating, many of them, not all, most, I would say, are advocating for an actual thinking agent, supernatural, that is the creator and or sustainer of the universe. And nothing about my pursuit of truth or goodness or secular humanism fills that particular role. So already we are cherry-picking the aspects of God traditionally and saying, Matt has these particular aspects that I also attribute to God. And I agree. I just don't have the other ones, and those are the ones that I want justification for.